Welcome to Titan HST's Business Continuity Today, hosted by Todd DeVoe, where planning meets reality.
Welcome. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in this great land. And I'm Todd DeVoe, and I've been involved responding to emergencies and disasters since 1989. In 1999, I started my journey in the field of emergency management while I was working in EMS in one of the nation's most active counties. And I started off in logistics of all places. And since then, I became an educator, teaching at the post-secondary level, learning and sharing. And I love to share what I've learned. And welcome to Business Continuity Today. We will continue to learn together. Today, we're talking about crisis management and what it really means. And, I like I said, I read a lot and I figure some stuff out. And hang on one second, I got to leave. And in this month's Crisis Response Journal, there's a great article in there by Thomas Lahnthaler. I'm going to say his name wrong. I'm sorry, Thomas, for butchering your last name. And it's discussing what it is to manage a crisis. And his argument is managing a crisis really just managing people? And going through his article, it really does make a lot of sense of what he's saying, right? Because if we think about how we went with the COVID-19, it wasn't just managing buildings, fires, things like this that we think about when we talk about crisis in general. It's really managing people's expectations of safety and people's expectations of what it is to go to work, changing the work landscape, with, like we're doing today with remote work type stuff, the technology that's there for that type of remote work. And then what's the psychological and emotional tasks that these crises play on people as well. And even with your physical disasters, right? Fires and floods and hurricanes and tornadoes and earthquakes, right? There's still the emotional, psychological aspect that we have to think about when we're looking at managing crisis. Over the years, when someone has made a living responding and coordinating emergency events for small and large, I've been working under the assumption that we've been doing is actively addressing the issues, right? Actively addressing the cause of that disaster. And somehow people become, almost like a secondary thought, right? And yes, I understand that we're addressing life safety issues, and that's very important, right? We know that. But I don't know. I mean, maybe it's been doing this too long to where people themselves become just a cog of that response. And it's that I can tell you that through my experience, we've seen this across the land, right? We look at, say, a wildland fire here in California, and obviously stopping the fire is the most important thing to do because that's going to save people's homes and people's lives. But when we say we're going to evacuate a community due to the fire, it's hey, we're moving people out regardless of what's going on. We're knocking on their doors, telling them to leave. And when they get out of the fire area, it's almost like, hey, it's not our problem anymore. And so are people not the reason for the plan? Tell me if I'm wrong, right? If you think I'm wrong, if you don't think that people are the reason for the plan, explain why and what that really means. So crisis management, is really the ability for tactics that are required to handle unexpected and threatening events, right? And while definitions differ across the board, the idea is similar, right? The situation occurs, it presents a threat, and it needs to be managed. So Thomas, in his piece, Crisis Management is People Management, he says, I've worked with outspoken leaders, managers, stakeholders, friends, and colleagues about their experiences during COVID-19 as crisis management became personal and moved into the homes as much as it played on the global scale. One single common denominator stood out. Crisis management is about people above anything else. And I have to agree with him there. All right. So Thomas continues to argue that we not only have a problem with what our focus is when it comes to managing a crisis, but we all have a problem with the nomenclature of our profession. So it contributes to language to the problem of interpreting the words that we use and how we see the world and our job. So I want to take this a step further. On LinkedIn, Kyle King asked the question about the name of emergency management position. Is it right for the job? And I don't know, right? Do we manage emergencies only? And then it became this conversation that got deeper into where does emergency management belong in the chain of things, and with people coming from risk management says that emergency management should fall underneath risk management. Chew on that for a minute, because when we start talking about the nomenclature of what we do as emergency managers, it does make a difference on where we sit at the table, right? So I'm not in a favor of name change, actually. As I stated in the post and in the conversation I had with Kyle King and the group of people that were kind of bantering back and forth on LinkedIn, I said, what is the name of the firefighter? Should we change the name of firefighters? Because due to building codes and whatnot, fire departments, city fire departments specifically, run more EMS calls than they do, arguably, than they do running fire calls, right? Where they're actually pulling hoses out and putting fires out. So now, is it more of an EMS department than a fire department? Should be called EMS department that happens to fight fires? No, of course not. We're not going to change that. Not going to change the nomenclature, or the history, or the culture of that. Still a fire department that happens to run EMS calls. I don't see the wholesale change of other jobs in the public sector, safety sector either, right? And then in the idea of the name debate, the question is, what is the core function of emergency management? Some are arguing that EM should, do other things, such as, Seattle and San Francisco, for instance, talked about putting the homeless issue underneath emergency management, which is not really necessarily an emergency in the sense of what we think of lights and sirens. So what do? We manage people. I think at the end of the day, I think Thomas is absolutely right. Risk, if we take a look at, the safety professionals in general, right? Risk management under the OSHA, right, is a formal practice of identifying hazards, evaluating and analysis risks associated with those hazards, then taking action to eliminate the hazard or control the risk that can't be eliminated to minimize the injury and potential illness. Risk management is a critical step in any organization's effort to proactively mitigate risk before an injury or catastrophic, catastrophe occurs. So risk management in general, yeah, I can see them saying it's a hazard function, right? Forward looking, mitigating those hazards. You see a slip and fall issue, you make sure it's fixed. I think emergency management goes back down to crisis management, goes back down to people. It goes back down to being there when the crisis occurs and what happens afterwards, and making sure that humans impacted by this disaster can be made whole, or at least try to be made whole, right? We talked about the idea of resiliency and anti-fragility, and I think emergency management actually pushes that idea forward. If you think about Daniel Ulrich's book, Black Wave, the government of Japan was not managing the cause of the disaster. They weren't managing the earthquake. They weren't managing the effects of the disaster, the tsunami, the outcome of the Fukushima nuclear reactor meltdown. They were managing people, putting people in safe places. Now, you could argue that they did a poor job in some areas, right? But the idea here is that they had to place people into shelters and make sure that they were able to get food and water and care, right? We take a look at the economic impacts of things. We value those, right? 235 billion in losses, 125,000 homes destroyed, 270 railroad lines gone, 40,000 people that cannot return back to home, and then of course 18,000 lives lost. When we stress the impact of disasters on the millions of people in Japan, how it influenced millions of people worldwide, and how we look at the built environment still today, that's what we're looking at, right? We're looking at the built environment and how these disasters really impact it. Why do we look at the built environment? Because it impacts people. There's a school of thought out there that there's no such thing as natural disasters. They're just natural hazards, and disasters don't come into play until it impacts humans. Now, there's some flaws in the thinking, but I think I understand where they're coming from for that, right? Because we can't impact the disaster onto millions of people in Japan, right? Without saying it's millions of people in Japan. The $235 billion in losses, an economic loss. Can it be recovered through insurance and through other things? Possibly. right? But we measure these things in billions of dollars and millions of dollars, but and sometimes lives laws, but we don't measure these things in the impact of how human beings, what the long-term effect is. Take a look at New Orleans, the lower ninth ward, right? Is it recovered? I'm going to tell you it's not, right? When a city loses 50% of its population for a period of time, and only 25%, I think it was, that came back. It might be a little higher now. Right? I haven't seen a new study on it, right? But still, right? The economic and personal impact from that disaster, from that hurricane on one city, specifically New Orleans, right? It's measurable. Now you have people that used to live in New Orleans that are spread across the country, right? Because they don't want to go back for various different reasons, right? We lose people for earthquakes and wildfires and things like this. You know, the impact of the disasters across in California and the Western United States, and hurricanes and tornadoes and whatnot also impact that. So I'm not just picking on New Orleans, right? I'm just saying this is just something that was studied, and the influence of the disaster and impacting humans, right, is out there. It's palpable. The other side of it too is communication. How do we communicate these things? What words do we use when we talk about the nomenclature of our profession? How do we communicate with the people about the disasters that are happening, or the recovery aspect of things and going back to normal, right? We all talk about going back to normal, and what does that mean? During a crisis, it's leadership. Leadership is needed. You have to be at the tip of the spear. You have to be leaning forward. You cannot be behind the spear pushing it forward. And this is when each member of the organization has to have a deep understanding of the why of your organization. What are the core tenets that you have? What direction are you all going? If all the people are moving that direction, maybe it's not just the physical plant of the office building. Maybe we talk about the idea again of the organization, because now you're spread across through, like, say, COVID, where people working remotely. Is the organization still moving forward? Can argue that it is. It's the people that are moving the organization forward, not the physical location. Over the last year plus, we've learned that we can work from home in remote places. We do not need that office building to make things happen. However, we do need leadership. We do need the people. We do need the human impact on making sure that things are going forward. Well, everybody, thank you so much for visiting with us today and spending your time. Visit Titan HST for all your communication needs. Remember to follow us on your favorite podcast player: Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. And if you follow us on your favorite, or subscribe to us on your favorite podcast player, please don't forget to give us a rating. I'd love to have 5 stars, and share this with your friends, family, and anybody else who's interested in business continuity. Until next week, stay safe and stay hydrated.